Channel 3 Moscow is a production of KTCA-TV for stations of the Minnesota Public Television Network.
Hello, I'm Jan Smaby. From the looks of Soviet television this past month, it seems that spring is in the air in the USSR. Tonight, we'll see how the Soviets experienced the lighthearted spirit of the season, as we see everything from the latest spring fashion news to a Soviet stand-up comedian taking satirical potshots at life in the motherland. On a more serious note, we'll also see how the Soviets reacted to this week's U.S. attack on Libya. So don't go away. We have an exciting show for you tonight on the April edition of Channel 3 Moscow.
Hi, I'm Joe Summers. The Soviets haven't been keeping their feelings about the United States' relationship with Libya a secret. But this week's U.S. air attack prompted an especially quick and critical response from the Soviet Union. Now, we just received these reports this morning, and for technical reasons that I barely understand myself, that means that the result will be a slight flicker in your picture. Our reports tonight are translated by Basil Ivanov. The narrator is Laurie Kamen.
As reported by Libyan radio, American aggressors carried out a barbarous air raid early this morning in Tripoli. Included in the destruction caused by the bombing was the residence of the revolutionary leader of Libya, Muammar Gaddafi. Several members of Gaddafi's family were injured. As a result of the air raid, residential areas and civilian quarters as well have reported casualties in the capital city. Appearing on national television, President Reagan confirmed that the American air attack on Libya was carried out according to his personal orders. The head of the administration hypocritically argued that this action by American armed forces was taken in self-defense. At the same time, Reagan warned that the U.S. is ready to inflict new strikes on Libya if they are necessary. Stop military action against Libya. Money for the needs of the people, not war. These were the words written on signs brought to the home of the president by anti-war activists, as well as by representatives of women's, youth, and religious groups. The United States has clearly shown today who really is conducting a program of political terrorism in the international arena, a TASS reporter was told by one of the initiators of the protest, David Cartwright, the acting head of the organization Citizens for a Sane Nuclear Policy. An act of war has been made against a small Arab nation. It is a sign of American military expansion in the region, he added.
Joining us tonight are our regular panel of Soviet experts. Nick Hayes is a professor of Soviet history and culture at Hamline University and Macalester College. Stephen Feinstein teaches Soviet history at the University of Wisconsin River Falls, and Norma Noonan is a political science professor at Augsburg College. Welcome back to all of you. Nick Hayes, the Soviet Union seems to have been blowing hot and cold on the Libya situation, and more recently now hot. How do you react to this?
Well, I think there's two reactions of watching what we've seen tonight. The first reaction is that really for at least a half year now the Soviet Union has been distancing itself from the more radical elements in the Middle East and has been fairly ambiguous about the way it views Gaddafi. And what we see, number one, here is that an action has forced the Soviet Union to indicate some gesture of public support. But more important, it's not a direct statement of support for Gaddafi, it's a direct statement of anti-Americanism, and for this they just simply let the Americans tell their own reaction, the head of SANE and the demonstrations in the United States and so forth, to indicate that the burden of this problem lies primarily on President Reagan.
There's nothing in the report that says anything about the Libyans being good guys.
No.
No. One of the things that struck me was the fact that the emphasis was on Reagan's personal responsibility, and I think they're trying to separate Reagan and the United States.
This has always been the tactic, the American people versus the American government, but there is a direct linkage, obviously. It's not like East European systems.
Now, they canceled the meeting with Schultz in preparation for the summit. Did they do that really because of what we did in Libya, or did they find that a convenient excuse to cancel?
My feeling is that there were a lot of technical problems in moving toward the summit. The original plan was for July. It wasn't working out. The preliminary meetings didn't get off the ground. There were problems with the nuclear underground testing program, problems with the arms limitation. The Soviet proposal sort of fell dead. Reagan then said he didn't want to get involved in a summit during the election season, so the possibilities was for November. So here the Soviets can make a gesture of support for Libya by withdrawing the proposal or for the meetings of Schultz and Shevardnadze, and perhaps rescheduling it later in the summer for November or December.
I don't disagree with Steve. In fact, I agree with everything he says, but I'd add to that linkage. In the past, the Americans have made much of linkage, and now the Soviets have a chance to do linkage. We won't talk to you as long as you behave like outlaws.
Well,
one thing that I think that is clear, that there may have been a misunderstanding of how serious the Soviet intentions were here, because it has been referred to the fact that in 1972, when the United States mined Haiphong Harbor, it was at the same time as the Nixon-Brezhnev summit. Brezhnev didn't do anything. There was apparently some anticipation by the administration that the Soviets wouldn't back down. But there are some serious issues here as far as the Soviets are concerned, and this is a gesture that they take seriously.
Quickly, Nick, how long do you think the Soviet criticism of the United States will last on this issue?
On this particular issue, I suspect it can go on for quite a while. Especially if there's a chain of an increased military presence by the United States in the Mediterranean, you'll see increased coverage and to a negative effect on the United States there.
Joe, we are now going to move on to another segment, are we not?
Well, I sure hope so. Like most Minnesotans, the Soviets seemed anxious to put winter behind them this month, even though it's still pretty chilly there, too. We saw several stories about fashions for spring and summer. This next segment also illustrates what some might call cultural exchange at the cash register as Soviet consumers talk about their preference for natural fiber clothing. The next thing you know, there'll be an LL Bean in Leningrad.
This is the Universal Store for Youth. There is a great deal of activity in the store these days. Everyone wants to pick out something special for spring. What attracts the attention of the customer the most? Does a link exist between style and health? These questions were directed to the customers by the head style expert of the All-Union House of Models, Irina Alexandrovna Andreeva. Tell me, please, in your opinion, is there a connection between style and health? Yes, of course. Clothing has become much more practical today. Clothes are more comfortable and more appropriate to the seasons, and the assortment is greater now, too. What do you think? Is style related to health? I think they are. And how do you think they are related? Because currently, cotton fabrics are in style, and these clothes feel good and are good for your overall well-being. These clothes are much better than synthetic materials, so it stands to reason that what we wear should affect how we feel. But a cotton skirt has to be washed and starched and ironed, while a synthetic fiber skirt just has to be washed and carefully dried, and it is ready to wear. Don't you see any advantage in this? I still prefer natural materials. Look at these dresses. Is there anything here that you like? Taking into account that this dress is made from synthetic fibers, I still might buy it. I even like the style, but because it is too small in size, I would pass it up. I still insist on the fact that man-made and synthetic fibers are perfectly acceptable in contemporary clothes. What do you think? I think that there are a certain number of synthetic fibers used in clothes that are very practical. The clothes are easier to take care of and they keep their new appearance longer. It would be nice to see less of the synthetic material used in summer clothing and more used for fall and winter clothes.
Dressmaking apparently is a popular pastime in the Soviet Union. This report from March 21st describes the variety of pattern styles available in this season's Soviet pattern magazines.
Но многие из вас шьют, и, наверное, очень хотели бы вы получить журналы и альбомы с выкройками.
I hope that you've liked the styles we have shown you, but many of you sew, and you would like to get magazines and albums with patterns. I would like to show you some of them. There are magazines that are called I Sew Myself. It is published by the House of Models, and later I will give you the address from which you can order these magazines. I want to mention that this magazine costs 85 kopecks. The magazine Style and Sports is more substantial, not only for the number of patterns it offers, but that the patterns are full-length ones. And its price is more substantial as well. It costs 2 rubles and 70 kopecks. Well, you probably don't make these kind of purchases every day. And now, if you would find a pencil and paper, you can write down the addresses where you can order all of these magazines.
In addition to enhancing Soviet women's wardrobes, springtime in the Soviet Union, not unlike the U.S., can also be a good time to spruce up the home. That could explain the timing of this lengthy report on March 21st about an interior decorating salon.
This is the furniture salon, which constructs furniture to your personal specifications. A consultant will help you with your needs, assess the size of your apartment and your family, and will then help you pick out exactly what you need. As you can see, traditional forms of furniture, like dressers and chests, are not forgotten. Here you can see that the furnishings have all been installed in this apartment. Think about it. You may see something here that you could use. Here's the entryway, just as in many of our apartments. But a closet like this one will easily help you keep things in order. There's another interesting feature in this apartment. The ceiling is decorated with cutouts from the wallpaper, and nothing else is used on the ceiling. Maybe this idea will come in handy for you. And finally, the kitchen, which unfortunately is small like many of ours. To increase the space in the kitchen, you can install this kind of table. It's called a book table because you can open and close it. Everything here is arranged to maximize the available space.
Soviet TV often pays tribute to Soviet designers. This next feature celebrates the 75th anniversary of one such artist's work and the elaborate process it involves.
It seems like we have seen the Fedoskinsky lacquered artwork before, but at the opening of an exhibit commemorating 75 years of Fedoskinsky miniature art, people were crowding into the display hall. There is a new wrinkle to this exhibit, the so-called lessons in the art form. Anyone who is interested can observe the miracle of how a Fedoskinsky miniature is created. Vladimir Alexandrovich Srdaketskov, who has worked on the miniatures for 24 years, and Svetlana Kulgavova, who has just completed her art training 2 years ago, are both explaining and showing what a long and difficult process it is to complete just one lacquered box. Because this is an anniversary exhibit, you can follow the history of these artworks, and you can see the wide assortment of creations. A great variety of artworks have been produced over the years. Here is a box for tobacco, a folding glass, a case for glasses, but the boxes depicting a variety of subjects are the main attraction. During the Soviet period, the Fedoskinsky art has experimented a great deal. There are scenes of uprisings, the classic troikas, and portraits.
Like their American counterparts, Soviet women are moving into what were once male-dominated careers. This program, entitled The Morning Mail, takes a frivolous look at the new and improved Soviet woman.
My friends, for ages, a lot of women has been told in poem and song. Women toil against their will for unknown persons' sins. But contemporary women are saying something totally different. The woman reads the paper, while the husband is cooking for the kids. She is at the movies. He is in a crowded store. She's concerned about her favorite team, while the husband is ironing an apron. Because the women are the majority, nobody is thwarted. Not when a woman is the director, not when a woman is a pilot, and it isn't so rare that the wife supports the family, not the husband. And if this trend does continue, it seems that we'll have to celebrate an International Day of Men. And a chorus of men will be singing, "You can't live without women," and that's the truth, my friends.
Norma, is that the counter-revolution of the Russian mail there?
I think so. I think this is male lib or male rebellion.
Well, it's really weird. There's so much stress on changing sex roles, and here we see something like that right out of the 50s.
Well, mostly the roles are not changing, and so this is sort of almost a spoof of Women's Day, which makes one a little worried, because I think in the West we've taken International Women's Day in the Soviet Union seriously. This raises the question, are they?
Well, and we have talked in previous programs about the extent to which the women's liberation movement has taken hold in the Soviet Union. And you have tended to say that it is not yet that strong.
No, and that very few women would be at the movies while their husbands were in crowded stores.
Let me bring you back to something else, and that was a discussion about the patterns for dresses for women. Now, one question is, how much is 2 rubles and 70 kopecks?
It's close to $4.
So that actually would be an expensive pattern to buy.
It's fairly expensive, and then of course the dress might not fit you. So you could buy that pattern and you can't sell it back or return it. So you're stuck with it.
Yeah, it's especially expensive in relationship to income.
Right.
Speaking of fit, I noticed that one woman looked at the dress and says, "I won't take it. It's not my size." The dresses just come in one size?
I assume those were samples.
The traditional structure with the patterns was that you went to House of Fashions, bought the pattern, made your own. There was such a shortage of sizes that that was the viable alternative.
Well, do women in the Soviet Union sew more of their clothes than purchase them, or no?
Yes.
Well, they do.
Yes, and they also have them tailor-made. Like you get the pattern and then you go to the little seamstress. Atelier is the seamstress.
If you go to a typical department store, you'll discover that the longer lines are for fabric than they are for the actual garments hanging on the rack.
I was interested in the push for natural fibers. Do you think it has something to do with the surplus of cotton? Or maybe I should ask you, do you think, what is the relationship between health and clothing?
Well, the only
I'm just absolutely puzzled by that.
You wear warmer clothes in the winter and cooler clothes in the summer, and the Soviets have had one weight all year round until recently, I think. There have not been that many summer clothes.
I think what they were aiming at, though, is that there was a natural preference for natural fabrics in the Soviet Union because of the absence of any type of marketing procedure that introduced people to synthetics. But the logic there was totally opposite of what you would expect, because they wanted the synthetic fabrics in summer and the natural fabrics in winter, and there should be a preference for cotton in summer.
Well, we'll never find out. We must leave these mundane concerns and go to space. Jan?
The Soviets have always professed to have great pride in their space program, but they haven't always been very public about it. That style seems to be changing.
Up until very recently, Western media has had limited access to the inner workings of the Soviet space program. But in recent weeks, the Soviets have invited members of the international media to get a closer look. This next report about a press conference with the two Soviet cosmonauts who will eventually hook up with the Soviet space station is a case in point.
It was cloudy at the space station today, and the dull-colored spaceship looked more like a sea vessel than one which was going into space. The rocket and the attached capsule are wheeled out of the installation early in the morning, as usual. This is not just a matter of tradition. After the rocket has been placed vertically on the launching pad, it has to be fueled and its many systems have to be checked. There cannot be any variations from the schedule. Everything is done in strict adherence to instructions, in accordance to all flight specifications.
While opening up their space program to the world, the Soviets are also celebrating their first quarter century in space, as we see in this report from March 18th.
The day of Yuri Gagarin's flight is still remembered here, and his flight originated from this very spot. A specialist who wrote for the magazine of measurement registration and said, "Hooray, there's a man in space," was subject to prosecution. That's the way it is. No emotions allowed. And now the rocket is standing in readiness, and the cosmonauts are continuing their preparations for flight. A conference was held in Moscow dedicated to the history of aviation and space travel, marking the 25th anniversary of man's first space flight. Among the guests is the director of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Space Travel, James Hartford.
I feel
that Gagarin's flight was an outstanding achievement. It's hard to believe that 25 years have passed since his flight. Unfortunately, the cooperation between our two countries hasn't progressed as far as one would like, but I am hopeful that it will improve in the coming years. I feel that the Vega project is an excellent example of success in space that can be attributed to international cooperation. We must build on this example over the next 25 years. Today, cosmonauts Leonid Kizim and Vladimir Solovyov began to show us in detail their new home in space, a home which is destined to become a home of friendship in orbit. The station's name, Mir, which means peace, is symbolic of their mission. You are looking at the new space station. Salyut 7 is flying right next to us. An analogy of these two stations would be like two houses built next to each other on Earth. But there will come a time when these so-called homes in space will gather together and form a city in space. And the first steps in this direction must be made by this news station.
Stephen, is the Soviet Union's more recent openness about their space program in any way attributable to the disaster we had with the Challenger?
I think it had antecedents before that. I think it's largely associated with Gorbachev. We saw some of this developing well before the Challenger disaster, but they have momentum, and they took initiatives with Halley's Comet. They have a number of cooperative ventures going on, which includes the Vega program, and they've had more successes than we've had. So I think with Gorbachev's generally opening of the whole spectrum, whether it's consumer goods or the space program, there's a willingness to share information.
The other thing is Gorbachev is emphasizing that the Soviet Union should be a modern technological power. This is their best achievement, apart from the military, which they can't share with us.
It's a move away from that defensiveness. Our stuff works, and we have enough faith in it that we can show it on TV live now.
But there's also another dimension in terms of international space politics. The first generation of the space race, as we used to call it, is over. They don't have to go in these kind of competitive of how many people go up and who's the first one to make it to the moon. That story's forgotten. This is a different line of story. It's just the general promotion of Soviet aviation and technology for peaceful purposes, as opposed to, of course, what they're contrasting the American
they're in a situation now where there's someone in space all the time because of the nature of their program. You're talking about 3 months, 4 months at a time, and they're talking about building a micro city in space. So this
they sure
is
must build a lot
things.
of monster rockets over there
Well,
to carry those whopping payloads up there. I'm not surprised that Gorbachev's proud of it.
well, and how aware are the citizens of the Soviet Union about the space program? Have they always been aware of it, or is this recent?
It's always been a
It's always
major
been-
point of
Always,
promotion.
always.
It just
always.
hasn't been live like.
No, well, first, the media coverage, the style is entirely different. It's really kind of an Americanization of the coverage of space.
Yes.
But the promotion of the cosmonauts and the space program as heroes and
Even
models
with
for
little
Soviet
Sputnik, that
youth.
was the beginning.
Right.
And tonight
Sure.
we saw the great Soviet reference to the great hero, Gagarin, and the first Soviet cosmonaut.
And Gagarin's achievement is recognized universally.
Sure.
Last week in the New York Times, there was a feature story on him, 25 years.
Well, on that note, we are now going to move out of space and on to international events.
A bit later in our show, we'll be offering you the chance to browse through a recent English-language edition of Pravda, which includes a story about the Hormel strike in Austin. All you need to do is to record the final few minutes of this program on any VCR that has freeze frame advance. We'll tell you more about that later. But first, let's take a look at how the Soviets covered international events this past month. We'll start with their coverage of the French national elections. This report from March 18th suggests that while the Socialist Party may have lost its majority control, it still remains the most important party in France.
Итоги выборов в Национальное собрание.
In France, the results are in from the national elections. On the front pages of French newspapers is the story of the change in France's political climate. The majority in the National Assembly no longer belongs to the Socialists, but to a coalition of two bourgeois parties, the Union for the Support of the Republic and the Union for French Democracy. The newspapers view this as a move to the right by the French constituency. As soon as the first election results were known, leaders of the political parties were offering commentary on television. Although it was clear that the Socialist Party would no longer have a majority in Parliament, it remains the most important political force in the country. Every third voter casts his ballot for the Socialists. Through the night, results of the election were coming into the Ministry of Internal Affairs, where radio and TV coverage followed the results coming in from all parts of the country. Journalists were reporting the alarming news that the neo-fascist group known as the National Front had achieved a powerful hold on France's politics.
Фашистская группировка так называемого Национального фронта. Неонацисты будут иметь в Национальном собрании солидную парламентскую группу.
This next story follows the plight of a West German woman who, according to this report, lost her job as an unemployment counselor because of her membership in the Communist Party.
В Мюнхене мы встретились с этой женщиной. Мы уже знали о ее судьбе.
Ingrid Freimar, 26, has become a victim of the practices of the West German government, which denies a person the right to work. In this case, the church played the role of the persecutor. It's been a year and a half since I've been able to work in my profession. I worked as an educator in the Center for the Unemployed. Here in Munich, the center is under the jurisdiction of the Evangelical Church. an anonymous phone call was received saying I was a member of the German Communist Party and I was fired. The unemployed people I had been working with were troubled by my dismissal, as were my colleagues, who were very impressed by my work. But nothing could help me. Now I'm in a very difficult situation. My husband is in school and I'm pregnant. I do not receive unemployment compensation. It was lucky that I did find a job in a bookstore, but this is a solution that is dictated by my situation. This is not work in my chosen profession.
В Швеции продолжается расследование по делу об убийстве Улофа Пальме.
Soviet TV closely followed the investigation surrounding the assassination of Sweden's prime minister last month. This report, which appeared March 22nd, details the arrest of a suspect with ties to American ultra-conservative Lyndon LaRouche.
Сегодня все отчетливее видна политическая подоплека этого преступления.
In Sweden, the investigation of the murder of Olof Palme continues. The concern here is the political undercurrent of the crime. In Sweden and in other Western nations, there were those who hated Olof Palme for his activism in the peace movement and for his efforts to thwart the threat of war. The Commissioner of Swedish Police, Hans Halmer, is now telling journalists that the suspect arrested in the Palme case is being released for lack of evidence. The authorities and the police are acting within the framework of Swedish law. It is known, however, that the suspect belonged to the so-called European Workers' Party, an international pro-fascist party that originated in Sweden in the mid-70s. The members of the party advocate Sweden's entry into NATO and having Sweden armed with nuclear weapons. The headquarters of the party is in the United States. It is headed by the American millionaire LaRouche. Recently, every peacekeeping move by Palme was under close scrutiny of this party. Many of the members of this party were trained in the use of small weapons in West Germany, as well as in the state of Georgia in the U.S. The stated goal for the firearm training is self-defense, but who can argue the point that this training could be directed toward other goals?
The ups and downs of the U.S. economy are always watched closely on Soviet TV, as this next report illustrates.
In the currency exchanges of the world, the fall of the dollar is noted. This has been caused by a cut of 0.5% in the discount rate of banks. For a long time, high bank rates were profitable for the U.S., drawing foreign capital into the country. The holders of these deposits were preferred over American customers by the banks, who were attempting to gain large profits from the deposits. As a result, according to the statistics of the Bureau of Economics and Trade, by the middle of last year, the amount of foreign investment in the U.S. reached $1 trillion.
Not all of the news on Soviet TV last month involving the U.S. was bad. It comes as no surprise that coverage of Soviet child ambassador Katya Ilicheva received extensive upbeat coverage, including this report from March 21st.
On March 20th, the Soviet delegation for the protection of peace left the Soviet Union en route to America. The youngest and the most responsible member of the delegation is an 11-year-old Moscow schoolgirl, Katya Ilicheva. Of course, American and Soviet journalists wanted to meet her, and this was the resulting conversation. What do you like more than anything? I love dogs. Dogs. What is your favorite pastime? Swimming. Tell me, please, have you prepared a greeting in English for your future friends in America? Not yet. Well, you still have time. Tell me, if you meet any politicians in America, what will you say to them? What will I tell them? I'll ask them about disarmament. What do you think that the friendship of children of all nations can accomplish? I think it can accomplish anything it wants to. You're right. And a last question. What do you expect from your amazing and interesting trip? Of course, I expect peace on Earth, and I would be very happy if my trip carried at least a little bit of peace with it. The American journalists were interested in what Katya would be saying to American children. I will tell them about my school, my friends, about my country and its people, she answered. Her visit to America has begun. It is a testament to Samantha Smith, who said that friends across the ocean are possible and necessary.
Once again, reports from Afghanistan appeared on Soviet TV, this month emphasizing the Afghani sense of national pride. This first report appeared March 22nd. It follows the celebration of the Persian New Year.
The Afghan people greeted the New Year, 1365, according to the Muslim calendar. The New Year arrived at 1 a.m. According to tradition, the Afghans greeted the New Year at home, but the celebration continued outside as well. The celebration of the New Year is considered to be the arrival of spring in Afghanistan, but the New Year is closer in temperature to our New Year, so the celebration had a snow-covered background. Of course, this cannot spoil the celebration. It makes it even more festive. There were makeshift shops selling gifts for children, turning the center of town into a colorful Eastern marketplace.
This next report stresses the need for new jobs in Afghanistan. This March 26th report indicates that additional labor opportunities will give Afghan children a brighter future.
In Kabul, the first countrywide meeting of workers in the field of professional and technical education was held. The children are always the main hope for any democratic republic. They have become the most tragic victims of an undeclared war to which Afghanistan's so-called friends in the West have invested millions of dollars, marks, and pounds. But these enormous sums have not fed one child, not one school or nursery has been opened with the money, but it is this dirty money which causes Afghani children to lead lives of hardship. But despite the numerous troubles and the unsolved problems, the people's government is doing all it can to ensure a better future for the young generation. And this work, which would not be possible without the unselfish help of our country, is essential in the professional and technical training of Afghanistan's young people. For many of those who have come to Kabul today from various parts of the country, this display of the best professional and technical institutions of Afghanistan is the story of the country's future.
Now, that's a different sort of Afghani story.
Well, it's different from what we've seen in the last few months, in which we've seen primarily battle scenes, coverage of the military situation. What I thought was ironic about it is it could have been a story of another Soviet republic. It could have been a story from Soviet Central Asia. You see how they celebrate their local customs.
Normalcy has been achieved.
Right.
Yes.
And of course, then the second element is to emphasize the constructive role. We're just trying to provide education, jobs, and look at what the dirty money of the capitalists out there is doing, bringing in guns and destruction, things of that.
I think it's an attempt to see a light at the end of the tunnel from the war, at least psychologically, to bring the message home. It may not be the case at all, but at least it creates an illusion that something may be better.
Yeah, but at the same time, Steve, I mean, the image was pretty poor. I mean, you had a fairly sparse New Year's celebration in the background, a lot of rubble.
But the absence of fighting, I think, was significant, and the fact that they said they made the contrast between the money coming in for war supplies from the outside powers versus Soviet development money.
And some poor little kid pounding on a garbage can cover with a hammer, as near as I could tell.
To what extent, too, does it rationalize that Soviet aid is going for good? You know, the people are not fond of giving foreign aid. You see, and so back home there is some protest about foreign aid.
You mean the Soviets feel as warmly about foreign aid as we do?
More so.
Oh.
Meaning less so.
Exactly.
Speaking of not foreign aid, but foreign connections, maybe I have missed something, but in terms of the Palm assassination, I have never heard a linkage made to Lyndon LaRouche. Are the Soviets the first and the only to have done this, Nick?
I actually tried to check it out. To the best of my knowledge, I wasn't aware of that lead. I mean, I had heard leads in regard to West German terrorism, in regard to Croatian terrorism organizations. But what they did here is to exaggerate, apparently, an association to some sort of extreme right fascist party, link it to Palme, which is a source of genuine sympathy, and then do a story, really, on the development of extreme right terror.
Their news peg, as we'd call it, was that the Swedes arrested somebody and turned him loose.
I thought it was sort of multiple stories that were pushed together because there is that neo-Nazi connection in West Germany, and those parties do have linkages to the United States in Nebraska, and you have these survivalist groups in some parts of the United States. So I think it's a multiple linkage type thing.
And then the National Front in France, you know, the right is in danger again, here causing danger.
Speaking of France, isn't it odd to see the Soviets saying such nice things about the socialists?
Exactly. I mean, what's really amazing about that story is normally they keep their distance from Mitterrand and the Socialist Party. Their allies are the Communist Party. And there was a key little sentence in there. They identified the conservative parties as the bourgeois parties. Normally, the socialist parties is bourgeois, too, to justify why you must vote for the Communist Party.
They've been promoted to non-bourgeois for the time being.
Well, it probably shows a general shift in strategy that we've seen now for several months, that the Soviet Union is cultivating French public opinion and perhaps alarmed by the rise of the right in France.
Well, there certainly was a thrust in those opening pieces in this last segment of communist persecution in the Western world.
The story in Germany is an obvious case, but I think it's interesting that that person who was being interviewed, you don't know if she really was fired because she was a communist, and furthermore, the story could have equally been done in the Soviet Union with any person who applied for a visa to leave and has been thrown out of a job.
I think they're reaching for that kind of story, for the isolated person who is alienated.
Folks, I'm sorry, but if you really want to see those dirty American dollars at work doing evil around the world, check the next segment.
That is true. As in previous months, this past month of Soviet newscasts was filled with reports about U.S. involvement and intervention around the world. This next segment starts with a story about the U.S. Congress's vote on President Reagan's request for aid to the Contra rebels in Nicaragua.
As we have already reported, the U.S. House of Representatives has rejected by a vote of 222 to 210 aid of $100 million to the bands of Nicaraguan counter-revolutionaries. Our American correspondent reports. We observed a heretofore unseen campaign of poison and rumors. It was a siege of Congress, which was led by forces from above, from the White House. The president made an appeal over the heads of the Congress. There were frenzied people who were constantly lobbying Congress, putting pressure on congressmen. There was a huge TV and newspaper campaign, which announced in large newspaper ads that those who do not support the president are communists. I'll give you several quotes from the congressman from Maryland. I cannot tell my constituents, some of whom are living in poverty, that they will have to wait 2 years for relief because we are arming the Contras. The Speaker of the House, Thomas O'Neill, said that we are being pushed into war, just like it was with Vietnam. Congressman David Obey said that it is a shame for us to back a war supported by mercenaries. The vote showed 222 to 210 were against the proposal of the president. As President Reagan put it, this was a black day for the White House. They had wanted to make it a kind of crusade against the revolutions and everything that has transpired in Central America. But this didn't work out, and it failed because the American people are very wary of the kinds of actions that are reminiscent of Vietnam.
This next report appeared on Bramia March 21st. It describes the ongoing joint military exercises of the United States and South Korea, which have been dubbed Team Spirit 86.
This was a cooperative effort of American and South Korean troops in the Team Spirit 86 program. Participating in the maneuvers are 206,000 soldiers and officers, a large number of battleships, tanks, and other kinds of technology. The Team Spirit maneuvers are the largest in scale that Washington has conducted with its allies, in an aggressive posture and in accordance with military agreements.
And finally, to further round out the Soviet perspective of the United States' unwanted involvement around the world, this next report illustrates how Greek citizens want to get rid of U.S. military bases in Greece.
Greek society is increasing its efforts to eliminate U.S. bases from the country. Several U.S. military bases are moving ever closer to Athens, while the military air base Selenikon has settled, for all practical purposes, directly in the capital city. Its outside perimeter stretches along a city street over a distance of 100 meters. The American transport and military aircraft base here use the facilities of the Athens International Airport. Currently, the United States is increasing its pressure on Greece. The U.S. is trying to get favorable agreements concerning the future of its military bases. Although the current agreement does not expire for 2 years, Washington wants an answer immediately. With this in mind, an assistant to the Secretary of State, Rosanna Ridgway, has visited recently, and soon her boss, George Shultz, will visit too. The The attitude of Greek society toward the bases is clear and unequivocal. The Greeks are demanding an immediate dismantling of American bases on Greek territory. The leaders of social organizations came to a unanimous conclusion in a meeting in Athens to conduct a new anti-U.S. base campaign with the slogan, "Bases of Death Out of Greece."
Norma, in addition to being portrayed as the unwanted, there also seems to be a thread running through many of these stories, namely a separation of Reagan U.S. government policies from what the American people really want.
Well, I saw two different threads. The first one, in the earlier Libyan story, I thought they were trying to isolate Reagan, period. This one is anti-government. So there's almost three parties here. There's Reagan, the government that's aggressive with all these bases, and then the people, long-suffering.
And who are peace-loving. They
Peace-loving,
really don't seem
right.
to portray the Americans as not wanting peace. But in fact, it's our government that won't allow us to
The term that was used in
that.
the Nicaragua story was crusade, Reagan's personal crusade against the Nicaraguan peoples. It's sort of this image of the counter-revolution trying to take root even when popular opinion is strongly against it.
So, you know, we got to take note of the personalities. Now, that fella in the Washington Report used to be a desk man that we'd seen on Soviet TV, and now I see that he's here, huh?
Sure. Vladimir Danayev used to be the Vremya anchor person, so to speak, back in the 70s. And he's changed his style. He's probably the premier field correspondent in Washington now. And I loved the style, you know, it was almost to take off the glasses, look directly in the camera.
Look, you know,
to add credibility, he was just reading from congressional testimony there, analyzing it on the spot, a quick breaking story.
One of the things, though, perhaps that we as Americans don't appreciate is what it is like to have another country's military base on our land.
Yeah, I'm not sure I
Does
like
the Soviet Union people, or do they perceive themselves as having a better understanding of that than we do?
Well, I think they probably perceive themselves as having a better understanding of American military bases around Europe. They get a lot of information about it. And of course, they have a general, you know, historic sense of the dangers of foreign armies and the presence of foreign armies on their soil. I thought this story was really just a marvelous piece in the sense that it probably covered the political opposition to American bases in Greece very well.
Well, it was nicely done, and the Russians react to the Greek bases exactly the way we're reacting to the prospect of a Soviet base in Nicaragua. That's always the argument. If we don't take over Nicaragua and get the Somocistas out, the Russians will be there.
Greece has always been an area of interest, too, because of the strength of the Communist Party at the end of the Second World War.
Well, there's also,
Stalin
again,
said that was ours.
but there's also, again, their ability to use our own beliefs or opinions, at least among segments of the population, against us, in the sense that they quote the Tip O'Neills and others who are saying military dollars being spent rather than dollars to
What do you mean
ease
use
poverty.
it against us? Maybe those guys mean it.
Well, but that's
Tip
true.
and those fellas.
I mean, isn't that, I mean, in fact, there are many Americans who do believe that.
Well, certainly there's nothing wrong with letting
Not at all.
Americans speak for themselves in this
Not at
case
all.
that carries a story the Soviet Union wants to carry.
I think there's they use the American political process for their own purposes. I mean, here you have an actual democratic debate, but it's hard for them to tell it as a truly democratic debate where there is a pro and con, which is a natural political process. So what they do is they try to separate it and draw sides.
I wonder if the average Russian even grasps that.
What he grasps is that there's a great deal of conflict and tension going on in American politics.
And that does seem to be apparent. That does seem to be apparent.
And Soviet society is much calmer.
Well, we're going to move on to what will be almost our final segment. Joe?
If we were producing a magazine show, this next segment would probably be called something like Lifestyles of the 80s. At least that's what we think these stories have in common. Like many Western countries with a growing number of women in the workplace, Soviet men are learning to take a more active role at home. Some young fathers are even taking what we might call yuppie courses on how to relate better to their kids.
How fast time flies. Just 2 years ago, you gingerly took your infant from the arms of the nurse. And now your son is trying to sit up with the help of his cousin. His first steps and his first display of independence. Sonny's first color snapshot at age 1. How fast time flies. Have 2 years passed already? Or more accurately, 2 years and 5 months. The tiny infant has turned into a little person. He understands perfectly all that is said to him, and he speaks rather well himself. One can converse with him on an adult level. He is also able to memorize short verses and songs. He can amuse himself with games and books, and he can restrain himself if he gets hurt and stop himself from crying. He is patient. If his mother or father are busy, his movements have changed. They show self-assurance and coordination. The youngster has good control of his body. He can jump, run, crawl, dance. He can even imitate his mother and father. Our program today is a little out of the ordinary. We are going to conduct an examination for fathers in order to test your knowledge in different aspects of raising children. This is Yegor with his son Alyosha. Can the truck squeeze in there? Well, let's see what we can do. Watch out, it will fall over if you do it that way. Now see what happens. We'll have to build again. Now, like this, and put on another one, right. Now the car fits just right. Now take this one, put it on top. Put it on, put it on. Now put this one on. Now check to see if the car can drive in. Yes? Good. Well, should we read a book now? What did you do to this book? Why did you tear it up? Go stand in the corner, now. Yegor, why are you scolding him? It's none of your business. I'm talking to him. Don't butt in. Who did I tell to stand in the corner? Well, why are you yelling at the kid? So he tore up a book. So what? He has to be taught to be tidy. When you're screaming at the boy like that, he'll grow up a nervous wreck. He won't do anything of the sort. Don't be upset, Alyoshenka. Let's go play with Mama. You won't play with Papa anymore. Papa is always hurting your feelings. Good boy. You're a good boy, aren't you, Alyosha? Well, now you've seen it. Yes, we have. And what is your reaction? It's negative. Is this typical or atypical? Unfortunately, these kinds of incidents are not rare, and also, unfortunately, the protector of the child is always the mother or the grandmother. The father is always in the position of dealing out punishment. It seems to me that these kinds of incidents should not be discussed in front of the child.
Social satire is often used as a release here in the U.S., but we hadn't seen much of it on Soviet TV until last month's performance by this Soviet humorist.
This morning, as usual, the discussion at the vacation home was about losing weight. Before breakfast, a line had formed at the scales. A woman of pleasant demeanor and unpleasant physique was engrossed in the process of weighing herself. However, her true weight was confirmed by other women in line. It's a well-known fact that the best diet is the following. Eat your own breakfast, share lunch with a friend, and give your dinner to an enemy. Following this advice, most women give their dinner to their husbands. If a woman isn't married, she gives her dinner to her best girlfriend. Fasting is a success at our house. We are all feeling fine with the exception of 2 people who were taken to the clinic. A ghost was caught in our house last night. It was completely transparent and was flapping in the wind. Upon closer inspection, we saw that it was a woman from room number 6 who would steal feed from the canary at night. Today we all signed a letter we had written collectively, all of us who were able to sign it. In the letter we are demanding that the film Donut be banned, as well as the songs I Love Macaroni and Buy Me Some Bagels. Today was a day of great celebration. One of the women finally achieved her goal. When she stood on the scales, the arrow pointed to 0. However, one woman, who took her fasting to the point of starvation, who by the way is a professor of mathematics, said that 0 is not the final point. The negative numbers still remain.
Since the recent 27th Party Congress ended, the Soviet news program Vremya has been trying something new, emphasizing each new production story with this logo, an image which symbolizes the Soviet workers' push to meet the production goals set down at the Congress by Mikhail Gorbachev.
The overall production of industry for the months of January and February was up 7.3% compared to the same time a year ago. The productivity of labor is up by 6.9%, and as a result, productivity has grown by 95%. The newspaper Pravda, which published these figures, writes that the mobilization plan for these 2 months was completed at a figure of 102%. All of the Union republics fulfilled their task, and the Ministry of Industry reports that the only enterprise that fell short was petroleum.
This next report is about a trend that has become commonplace here in the West, but something we haven't seen thus far from the Soviet Union. video
В
rentals.
ноябре 1985 года в Москве на Старом Арбате открылся видеосалон.
In November of 1985 in Moscow, in Stary Arbat, a video salon was opened. In its library, you can find the best Soviet and foreign films, even films that have not yet been shown in the theaters. The video salon is a place for the rental of video cassettes, as well as providing a video hall for those people who do not own a video cassette player.
В репертуаре около 40 программ мультипликационных фильмов для детей.
The salon in Moscow carries 40 animated films for children, and the rental of one film costs 1.5 rubles for 24 hours. But for the rental of the most expensive film, depending upon its length, you will have to pay up to 5 rubles.
Steve, I'm kind of surprised by that. It never occurred to me that there were VCRs in any widespread amount in the Soviet Union.
It's quite recent, and like computers that we saw several months ago, there's a crisis about how to market VCRs, especially with the issue of underground videotapes. There have been many cases recently of tourists coming in with European-made videotapes and having them taken away at the border.
How much would a VCR probably cost? Do you know?
Fortune.
Yeah, I would think so.
Extremely expensive.
At least 3 or 4 months' wages, I would guess.
Certainly.
So obviously, we are not at a point in the Soviet Union where VCRs are going to quickly spread throughout the populace.
No, but you notice that the salon had rental facilities available, and that's probably the technique they're going to go with. I have to add one quick point about that story before it goes by. The Arbat is a new refinished kind of shopping mall in Moscow that opened up in January with elite, high-quality stores, and it seems to be kind of a new symbol of Gorbachev's Moscow that they have this type of arcade there now.
I kind of like that college quiz bowl of child rearing, too.
Yes, can we talk about that a little bit? You know, when they were showing the class on father parenting, I'm not so sure if the Soviet Union isn't ahead of the United States on that. Should we have some programs like that on television?
Would you sit there and build those little tunnels?
Well, but I mean, it's the thrust of it is to get fathers comfortable and understanding of their role as a primary parent.
Well, just a point though, but to put it on television at prime time to make the fathers watch it is more important than actually the message. We have this stuff on at 7 in the morning, I imagine, in various obscure hours.
Yes, and I was going to say that I think it shows that they're 20 years behind, that the father really doesn't know how to play with the child. Our fathers have always been playing with the kids. It's the changing of the diapers that they haven't done.
Well, what about the admission by one of the men on that panel that he thought it was true that the fathers lost their tempers easily with children?
It reflects the reality.
It really is true?
I think so. The usual situation that I've found with Soviet citizens is that they take the attitude that the woman works, as you saw at the beginning, doing all these tasks, and then she comes home, does the shopping, and then she cares for the children, and the father sits back, relaxes.
Reads the paper.
Doesn't know how to clean.
No. It's also part of one element of an official campaign that's been going on for 5 to 10 years. And we see many different images of women. But one point that some elements of the press have tried to promote is to say that one of the reasons that demographically we're declining and our birth rate is going down is basically because the men shunt everything on the women and they're reluctant to have more children. And this, I recall there was an editorial about 5 years ago in Pravda, to the point if the men only took more care of the children and learned how to push a pram on occasion, we'd have more children in this country. And this kind of follows that same logic.
That's a good insight, Nick, I think.
Yeah, but there's also one other thing here which has a little bit of absurdity to it, and I think it strikes at the root of many of the Soviet Union's problems. Everything has an official character to it. There's an official position on child rearing. That child at the beginning they showed was absolutely absurd. The only thing they didn't suggest was that he had read all of Lenin's collected works yet.
Yeah. I don't want to make a quantum leap here, but I'm going to ask this anyway. To what extent is there a problem of child abuse within the Soviet Union? Are any of you aware of that?
Considerable amount. Recently, there have been some stories from Moldavia of children being taken away from parents because of alcoholism and placed in orphanages.
It would come in the family with problems of alcoholism.
Well, the television has been carrying that story frequently in relationship to the campaign against alcoholism that it leads to child abuse. So it's a publicly recognized problem.
There were some comments among ourselves as we were watching our stand-up comedian. Now, granted, he does not compare to some of ours, but how did you react to him? Let's start with you, Steve.
Well, I think it's a cultural thing. It's very hard to react, especially in the translation, to what you're seeing. There are a lot of good humorists in the Soviet Union, and Soviet life is filled with anecdotes. It's the way the system works and doesn't work gives rise to a lot of jokes. I mean, so the society is actually rampant with humor.
Do you think that's something Americans appreciate about the Soviet Union?
Something we don't understand, certainly from a distance. Recently, through émigrés, there have been books published of Soviet jokes, but it hasn't received wide circulation. A few people who were humorists in the Soviet Union have managed to make it here, but very few.
I think the only people really who know Soviet humor are specialists, and they only share it at a speech. So very few Americans are aware of Soviet humor, really.
What do you think you would want people to carry away most from this last segment
Folks,
we just saw?
we
Oh,
can't
did
even
we
do
run
that.
out?
No, it's time.
Oh, and I'm sorry, but thank you all very,
Yeah.
very much. I guess that is going to be it for the April edition of Channel 3 Moscow. As we mentioned earlier tonight, we'll be giving you a chance to browse through a recent edition of Pravda, translated into English by Associated Publishers of St. Paul. This edition was particularly interesting to us because we found, of all things, the Soviet version of the Hormel strike in Austin, Minnesota. That's right, P9 made Pravda. So if you have your VCR ready, start recording now, and we'll transmit several stories to you at high speed. After the show, you can simply use your freeze frame advance to slow the images down to read them. All right, here we go. We hope you have enjoyed tonight's show, and we would like to hear your comments and suggestions. For those of you who have been watching for several months, let us know if watching our show has changed any of your attitudes about the Soviet Union. And for those of you first-timers, well, we'd like to know what you think, too. Call and let us know what's on your mind. The number to dial is 642-1980. You'll be talking to an answering machine, so there is no reason to be shy. That number again is 642-1980. We'll be back with another edition of Channel 3 Moscow on Thursday, May 22nd at 8 p.m. So mark your calendars. And Joe and I will be here this Friday night at 7 p.m. for Almanac. Until then, I'm Jan Smaby. Good night.
Channel 3 Moscow is a production of KTCA-TV for stations of the Minnesota Public Television Network.